Hello, welcome to Challa Chai Time. I hope you all have your chai and ready for this week's discussion on Regional Center EB-5 filings. Now there's going to be a corresponding YouTube video that outlines what the immigration process is that's complementary to this video. But today, remember, Challa Chai Time is to have people within the industry to give key insights on the business side and the industry side to kind of enhance your understanding of the immigration side. And today our guest speaker is Daniel Robinson, who could probably speak as an expert on a number of things, but today he is going to be talking to us as the Managing Director of the Atlantic Regional Center for Investment, one of the oldest EB-5 regional centers that has sustained the test of time, which is really notable. In particular, I think their secret sauce is, the background of the people that run it. For example, Daniel worked at Morgan Stanley for the Global Wealth Management Division, and in that role, he focused on the focused on the development of sales and marketing strategies for high net worth individuals, globally. And he is an industry leader in providing the more than profit perspective to companies, which is great. He's very committed to his community, and he's got a background in micro lending, green building, and he was a featured speaker and panelist for organizations such as the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, Council for Entrepreneur Development, and the Krispy Kreme Foundation. Wow. So let's welcome Daniel. And, hello, Daniel. I was just lauding your accomplishments, but in full disclosure, I do have to point out one of your shortcomings. And that is, since I'm a Tar Heel fan since 1967, your kind of Dukish background is just one small thing that I hold against you. So
it's okay, Lakshmi. We're used to the inferiority complex.
Very good, very good. I was almost tempted to wear my my Tar Heel T-shirt when we were national champions not too long ago, but I thought, you're my guest. Let me be respectful. But can you tell us a little bit before we get started about ARCFI? And I know that you've worked on a number of different types of EB-5 projects, maybe highlighting some of those projects and the background in the leadership of your organization.
Sure. And if you don't mind, Lakshmi, I'll share my screen briefly, just to run through some of the projects that we've worked on and have some contact information at the end of this as well. So for the guests, hopefully it'll be beneficial. So ARCFI is a regional center. As you mentioned, we are one of the older existing regional centers in the country. We were fortunate enough that we will be celebrating our 10th anniversary of approval in July, which is hard to believe. It's been an interesting 10 years, as you know, both in the immigration sphere on the whole and within the world of EB-5.
Sure.
We got in right as the industry was taking off, toward the tail end and the coming out of the last recession. It was a time at which low-cost capital was critical to the U.S. economy coming out of that recession. And so I like to think that EB-5 played a significant role, and certainly a significant role in the communities where EB-5 was able to be utilized. And so we're happy to have been part of that transition and have played the role that we did play.
And that's probably part of the reason why it is a immigration program that's supported, by both parties, because they, especially in a downturn economy, understanding that enticing foreign investment for creating U.S. jobs is a great program to have.
That's certainly the case. Again, as you're aware, Lakshmi, and I hope many of those listening today are aware, EB-5 is one of the few economic tools that we have that really comes at no cost to the U.S. taxpayer. It's a self-funded program from an immigration perspective. Regional like ours and investors and prospective investors like those listening pay fees associated with the processing of applications. Those fees are sufficient to support the USCIS staff required to manage the EB-5 program. And so it is truly an economic development tool that comes at no incremental cost to the U.S. taxpayer. And you're exactly right. I think that's why we see broad bipartisan support for the EB-5 program. And that's been evidenced time and time again with renewal of the program. The recent modifications were driven by the industry with the support of Congress. And so, there's an overwhelming level of support from those that have taken the time to get to know and understand the program.
And so these are your Northern Riverfront Marina Hotel and Port of Wilmington Cold Storage. You want to tell us a little bit about those projects?
Sure. So we at ARCFI, we're currently working on our fourth EB-5 project. The prior three have been completed successfully. You can see some of the statistics here. These two projects are in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is on the coast. One was a hotel and marina project. The other, a large cold storage facility on the port in Wilmington, which is one of the larger ports on the eastern seaboard of the U.S. Between the two projects, we had a total of 65 EB-5 investors, so about $32.5 million of EB-5 capital in those projects. We are fortunate that to date, we've never had an investor denied for their I-526 petition. I always have to backtrack. That's technically not true. We had one investor get denied several years ago and won their case on appeal, with which we helped quite a bit. And so that allowed us to keep our relatively perfect track record intact. As you can see here, all of the investors in the two Wilmington projects have received their I-526 approvals. Each and every family affiliated with those petitions is in the U.S. on at minimum a conditional green card. And then as you can see, looking through here, 29 of those families have already received their I-829 petition approvals. And so they and their families are now residing in the U.S. On their
without conditions and as a permanent resident.
Exactly.
And just so for those people who haven't had a chance to listen to the other video that talks about what the process is, once the investor invests the money into your project, they are eligible to file the I-526 with the USCIS. Once that's approved, they get, and if there's a visa availability, which we'll touch on later, but they get a conditional permanent residence, which is basically a permanent residence, but it has conditions. And the conditions is that you will submit information or give them information that you've created the jobs. And I want to touch on that when we talk about your current projects more specifically.
Sure.
But this is, the Durham Hotel. It's a beautiful hotel.
Thank you. So we learned, and I'll talk a little bit about this because I think it'll tie into some of the questions we're going to be discussing later. We realized early in the process that EB-5 is a powerful economic development tool. It's great for communities. It's great for job creation. It's great for developers who need access to lower cost capital. And it's obviously a tremendous asset for the investors who are looking to immigrate to the U.S. But as we got through those first two projects, we had a great relationship with the local economic development folks and the development team around those projects. But we realized that there were a few flaws in that model that we could address by playing a more active role in the underlying development of the project itself. And so what we're looking at now is the Durham Hotel in Durham, North Carolina, which is a project that was sponsored by ARCFI as a regional center, which our principals played an active role in the development as well. And the rationale behind that is fairly straightforward. Investors care about job creation and preservation of principal. And those two things, while initially aligned with the interests of the development team, can change over time. you may have a project that's underperforming, and so an owner or developer may look at reducing staff. They may make some decisions that put in jeopardy the long-term preservation of capital from the EB5 investor pool, whether it's over leveraging the project with too much debt or pulling too much cash out. And so we decided, as we were approaching work on the Durham Hotel, that by playing an active role there, we could ensure that management of the project on the whole, from the development stage all the way through to operations, could be handled with an eye toward protecting our EB5 investors' interests.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a very successful project. As you can see, 24 of our 26 investors have received their 526 approvals. The remaining 2 are still under review. We've already filed 7 I-829 petitions on this project. And so, you know, from an immigration perspective, it's ticked all the boxes and is meeting the metrics for our investor pool.
Mm-hmm.
We're most proud of a number of those bullet points that you see in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You know, we're a small luxury boutique hotel in a growing market, but we've been able to lead our market in both average daily rate and revenue per available room, which are the 2 critical metrics for hotel performance. More impressive and frankly surprising to us is that the year we opened, we were named one of the 5 best boutique hotel designs in the world.
Wow.
I bring that up not to brag, though I am very proud of that accomplishment. I think it speaks to the level of effort and enthusiasm that we put into our projects, our commitment to quality, and ensuring that what we deliver is not just an asset that meets the immigration needs of our investors, but is a viable business entity in and of itself.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about that. That's what I found really interesting about your group, is that, you know, making sure it's a viable business investment. And do you think your secret sauce is, you know, the background of the team, that the executive or the leadership of ARC5?
Yes, and I don't think it's much of a secret, at least to us internally. We're very fortunate that we've been able to surround ourselves with industry experts across the industries that we work in. When we started ARC5, we intended to be industry agnostic, meaning we were just going to look for projects that met the expectations of our investors, represented good quality investment opportunities, and could stand the test of time, because you know, EB5 is not a short-term process. This is not getting into a deal in order to quick flip it for a substantial profit. Mm-hmm. This is a long-term relationship that requires trust. And if we were going to be asking folks from across the globe to trust us with the futures of their professional and personal life, we felt like our responsibility was to go out and surround ourselves with people that could allow us to live up to that promise. And so it's everything from the development team that we work with, to the contractors that we've chosen, to the operations team that comes in on the day we're ready to open the doors of businesses that we help build. And so, yeah, I would say that the resources to which we have access and our ability to leverage and deploy those at the appropriate stages of the development process is one of the things that sets us apart.
Yeah, so it's not just I mean, because some of your folks have worked on, you know, really big projects. Wasn't it the FedEx football stadium?
Yes. I mean, so the development team that we built around the next project that I'll show folks, and if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and switch that slide. Mm-hmm. The 180-room Westin that we're currently under construction on in Greensboro, we've built a development team with, you know, 100+ years of experience, over $2 billion in development activity, including the construction of FedEx Field, which is home to the Washington Redskins in the National Football League. Glad to see you're a Redskins fan, close enough to be. But, you know, we don't take too much pride in the project that we do. So our team has built, you know, FedEx Field, an $800 million project. You know, on the other hand, I'm currently in the midst of a $2.6 million renovation of an old roadside motel in Raleigh, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. We cover the gamut. And again, I think for us, the focus has always been on identifying valuable, value-driven development projects, irrespective of size.
Right.
And so, we've got the ability to do large scale $60 million projects like the Westin you see in front of you here. We're not too proud to work on small, hundreds of thousands of dollars to $2 or $3 million projects. And we're also confident enough in our ability that we're able to participate in large scale projects pushing, $800 to $1 billion. So,
right.
That depth and breadth of experience that we're able to tap into is one of the things that makes the development process relatively seamless for us.
Right. And I think that, because I've worked with other regional centers, and sometimes there are lawyers that decide to go into the EB5 business, or doctors, or, folks that may have experience in their own fields, but not really with large development projects, and understanding, I guess, all the fiscal safeguards that you have to put in place when you're doing something like this, understanding the finances, the complex finances with large developments.
And particularly in an environment like we're in now.
Mm-hmm.
There's no point in sugarcoating it. We're facing a global pandemic that's having widespread economic ramifications, and we're feeling the pain as much as anyone is. But I think that depth and breadth of experience puts us in a position to understand that this too shall pass, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be painful. It may be protracted. But we're confident in our ability to manage through it in a fiscally prudent way.
Mm-hmm.
And that may mean making changes to things like construction schedule or the capitalization stack for the project, but we're prepared to do that, undertake those decisions, and manage through the hard times.
Right.
At the end of the day, the reward is worth it. It's not just the opening of a successful hotel. It's helping the families that we work with achieve their personal and professional goals. And we take a great amount of pride in being involved in that.
Yeah, and I think, I remember you once telling me that because you don't use agents, you actually meet the investors yourself, that you've had dinner at a lot of their homes, their families, and so it's kind of that relationship is very real.
At the end of the day, Lakshmi, I believe that the EB5 relationship, and really any investment relationship, comes down to trust and comfort. If you don't trust the people that you're partnered with, it's going to be difficult to sleep at night. It's going to be difficult to feel confident in the decisions that you've made. Mm-hmm. And sure, we could hire a marketing agency overseas to go run seminars and meet with 300 people at a time, and use a pressure-driven approach to try to convince people that our project is the right project, but it's never felt like the right thing for us to do. Mm-hmm. Use the example of the Durham Hotel. As you saw, we had 26 EB5 investors in that project. I literally had dinner in 21 of their homes. Mm-hmm. I've met their families, I've met their children. In many cases, I've met their parents. We're able to have honest and open dialogue over a meal where we can discuss their greatest concerns, whether it be, what am I going to do when I get to the U.S., to how are you truly going to manage and protect my investment? And I think having that opportunity to sit and talk with folks and meet with them, understand what their concerns are and address them directly, helps give us a bit of an advantage. But I also hope that it gives them the level of comfort that I would hope any investor enters a transaction.
Right.
We've done the same, obviously, in India. I've had the opportunity to visit on a number of occasions. We've sat down with folks in their homes. You look at the Greensboro project, and you're aware, Lakshmi, of how many of those folks, we know and break bread with and get to know the families of. And to us, it's an honor and something we're glad to be able to do.
Well, I know that one of my clients who was looking at EB5 projects, he had invested in the Durham project, and he's now, his petition is pending to get his conditions removed. And I still remember he wanted me to, I was driving, I think, to North Carolina. He was driving to DC. We met on the side of the highway. And he was looking to invest in a Florida project that somebody in his hometown in Ahmedabad was related to, that was doing it. And I told him, I said, I'm not going to make that decision for you. Just show the financials to your CPA in India, see how he assesses it. And his CPA suggested that he opt with a Durham hotel. And then later, while his I-526 was pending, he found out that that Florida project just went bust. So he's a really happy camper now that, he's all settled and pretty soon to have the conditions removed. And so.
And just as an aside, Lakshmi, while he is settled here in the U.S., he happened to be in India the last time that I was in India, and we were able to sit down in his hometown with some friends, and, get together and talk a bit more, both about where we were at with the investment, but just get to know each other better. Those are the kind of meetings and interactions that we value as much as anything.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Greensboro project, because for those people who don't know, I mean, when they think of North Carolina, everybody knows where Raleigh is and Charlotte, but they don't think of Greensboro. And I know that Greensboro is home to a number of universities, and as a mom whose children we spent a lot of money at hotels visiting our kids when they were in school, because there's so many events and functions that are around that college experience. The parents often visit quite a bit. And I know that there is that it's also the center for a lot of conferences and conventions, and, the NCAA, which is the basketball tournament and the rivalry we were talking about earlier, is played there quite a bit. I think it's scheduled to be played there again in 2021. So to me, I understood why the Weston project would be, the Greensboro Hotel would be a great location for a hotel. And I think Wyndham, the PGA golf tournament, is also on tour. So there's a lot of things happening in that area.
Yeah, there are. Greensboro gets a little bit of short change in the discussion around North Carolina. It's actually the largest city in the state, behind Raleigh and Charlotte. The metropolitan area is the second largest in the state. Greensboro, Winston-Salem, High Point. As you mentioned, there are 8 colleges and universities in the community. That's 43,000 plus undergraduate students and a little over 24,000 graduate students. And, from a selfish hospitality perspective, we like to remind people that means 8 graduations, 8 parents' weekends, 8 sets of sports teams playing football, basketball, baseball, soccer. All of these things drive folks to the community. And then you layer on top of that the academic stature of these universities, a handful of which are research universities. There's a lot of university collaboration in the Greensboro community. And so we're seeing expansion of things like biotech and nanotechnology centers and healthcare centers. But don't lose sight of the historic industry in Greensboro as well. It's still a very strong textile market. Logistics are huge. It's the convergence of 3 of the busiest highways in the US. And so all of your major trucking companies have facilities in Greensboro. It's also the global headquarters for Honda Jet. Volvo has its North American headquarters there, not just for the trucking division, but their North American headquarters. So it's a community that has a really strong business and academic base, 2 things that are great for the hospitality industry. Layer onto that, one of the things that you mentioned, which is the athletic connection with the Atlantic Coast Conference. And you end up being a sports destination as well. And then one of the unfortunate victims of this COVID crisis is that the city of Greensboro just completed a new 3,000 seat, give or take, performing arts theater that's about 2 blocks from our hotel site. That was slated to open in late March. They had some great performances lined up. Unfortunately, they've had to delay those, but that's another tremendous asset that's new to the community and will drive 25,000 plus hotel room nights a year just from the events that they're able to bring through there. So Greensboro is a community that we love as an investment market. We think it's headed in the right direction and see a lot of upside there, which for us made perfect sense when it comes to building the Westin.
And so the Westin Hotel is affiliated with the conference center?
So what we're doing with this project, we're taking an existing meeting and event space. So right on Greensboro's main drag, it's not called Main Street, it's Elm Street, but right on Elm Street, part of downtown Greensboro, we owned an existing meeting and event space called the Elm Street Center. And it's a 60,000 square foot building with about 35,000 square feet of meeting space. And for over a decade, it was the most popular meeting and event venue in Greensboro for events of its size. And one of the things that we began to realize about the downtown Greensboro market was that there was just a dearth of hotel beds. There's an older Marriott in downtown, but that was really it for downtown accommodations. And so as we began looking at ways to expand the existing meeting business, we began talking to folks about the idea of putting a Westin on the site. We thought that a higher end luxury product was what the market truly needed. It lent itself well to the types of events that we were already hosting in the Elm Street Center. And so the development of the Westin project really grew organically out of that.
Wow. And so this one will have a rooftop bar as well.
It will. So our original plans called for us constructing a small parking deck on top of which the hotel tower would have been built. Quite some time ago, the city had the opportunity to buy a significant portion of the land that you see in the top left-hand corner of the screen here, and approached us about partnering on a much larger parking deck that would effectively span a block and a half, accommodate 750 to 800 spaces, and would really give us the opportunity to house not only vehicles for guests staying with us, but also larger conferences that might be meeting throughout the day. And so having the opportunity to partner with them allows us to construct a 5-level parking deck. Our 6 floors of hotel rooms will sit above that. And then, yes, to your point, we'll have a tremendous rooftop amenity that will have a full-time bar accessible to guests and the public with great views of the downtown skyline. But we've also designed it in such a way that it allows for the rooftop to function as a wedding venue or a wedding reception venue, things like anchors for covered tents. It's going to be a tremendous amenity for the hotel.
Wow. So, you had brought it up, or you had brought up this issue earlier about the current economic crisis. And, as it is, individuals are apprehensive when they're investing in a project that they don't have a lot of control over. And I try to make them realize that given the processing time for the I-526, you can't manage the project if you don't have work authorized status. And you won't have that work authorized status until the I-526 is approved, a visa is available, you filed your either adjustment or your consular processed. And so, but there are some things that folks should look for when they're searching for an EB5 regional center. So what do you suggest to people, not just with yours, but just generally as someone with that financial background? What are the things that an individual should look for in an EB5 regional center?
Well, I think there are a handful of things. I think you need to be looking at regional centers and then also the projects in conjunction with one another, right? Because I do think it's extraordinarily important that a regional center fully understand the projects that they're sponsoring, have a relationship with the development team, and have the ability to both understand and convey to investors how the project's going to work. And so you always want to make sure that you have a regional center familiar with the team and the market that you're going to be investing in.
Because there are a lot of regional centers that operate kind of separate from the projects that are being developed under that regional center.
Many. And the one thing, Lakshmi, we've made a business decision to manage our regional center the way that we have. That's not a criticism of other models. We just think that for us and the types of investors that we've gotten to know over the years, having that level of connection really provides the comfort that an investor needs. And again, from our perspective, we feel like it ensures additional oversight beyond what that typical sort of separated view might provide to an investor. Again, the other thing I think it does is ensure what I just mentioned, which is knowing with some certainty that your regional center has a working knowledge of the project and market, as well as a relationship with the development team, so that there are no hidden surprises lurking anywhere around. The thing that we always tell investors, you have to remember, you initially come into EB5 thinking about it as a singular process. And the reality is you're doing two things. They're on parallel tracks. But once you've made that investment and filed your initial immigration petition, your investment is really moving along a separate track from your immigration process. There's some stops along the way where they're intertwined, ensuring that your capital remains invested in the project for the life of your immigration process. That's one of the requirements of EB5. And so you need to be cognizant of that. Ensuring that the job creation that was projected for the project comes to fruition, right, in order to ensure that you're able to retain that green card and immigration status. Sure, those things interplay. But at the end of the day, there are multiple outcomes that can happen. We always let people know it's possible to lose your investment but retain your green card. It's also possible to make a lot of money on your investment, but something happens that jeopardizes your green card status. And so what you really need to be looking for is the project and regional center team that provide the greatest likelihood of preservation of that capital and assurance of meeting the immigration objectives. And that's where our focus has always been. We always try to be clear with investors. If you're looking to get rich on an EB5 project, good luck, but we're not your regional center. We're not going to overpromise on the economic side of things. Our sincerest goal is ensuring that we work with you and your counsel to make sure that the principal is protected and we provide you a modicum of return. But most importantly, we're doing everything that we can to ensure that we hit those immigration targets and get you and your family here in as timely a fashion as possible.
Right. Well, we have a question. It's from, it's to you, but I think I can answer it as well. It's, hello, Mr. Daniel. I'm Sunanda from Bangalore. My son's I-526 was filed in September 2018 in the Greensboro project. Are any of the EB5 applications from this project approved recently? What do you deem to be the rough processing time? I just will say one thing, is that the USCIS has changed the way they're processing EB5 petitions. So they are giving priority to those petitions where there's an available visa number. So for Indian nationals, you're looking at a 7-month backlog. That's all in the visa availability. So that means that as they're prioritizing, they'll probably prioritize Indian national petitions over, some of the other countries where there's a greater backlog, like China. So that's one. Number two, I think so far this year, first quarter, they've only processed 455 for the first quarter, whereas they did about 2,000 for the first quarter of last year. But we're seeing that slowing down for all immigration processing. Daniel, you want to answer the question about if you've had any recent notices or approvals for the...
Sure. First of all, hi Sunanda. I hope that you and the family are doing well. It's good to hear from you. We have, like as Lakshmi was just mentioning, there was a precipitous decline in the number of processed I-526 applications from USCIS in the first quarter of this fiscal year. And that's true across the board. And so we've seen fewer and fewer applications being processed. That said, we have seen some indications, and as Lakshmi mentioned, I think there's some facts in regard to what USCIS is doing that might give us a bit of hope for what processing times and numbers may look like moving forward. Number one, as Lakshmi said, the decision to begin processing applications on an availability perspective in the short term mean that the rest of the world will be processed before India, Vietnam, and China. In the intermediate term, though, I think it's very important to keep in mind that retrogression within the Indian investor community is shrinking very rapidly and is expected to dissipate entirely in the very near future, at which point those applications will then become a priority for processing over Vietnam and China, which are expected to remain backlogged. So I would anticipate that in the coming months, we'll see both an increase in the number of petitions that USCIS is adjudicating. I would also hope that we'll see a marked increase in the number of petitions, specifically from India, that are being adjudicated as well. I just feel like I need to caveat that by saying that's my personal opinion based on what we're seeing out of USCIS and the reports that are coming out in regard to statistics and adjudications. But if past performance is any indication, I think those things bode well for an uptick in processing.
And that seems to be the general consensus, even in among the American Immigration Lawyers Association as well. I mean, you know, everyone seems to think that the way the processing time is working is actually going to work in favor of Indian nationals moving forward. So,
and EB-5, because I do think one of the important points, Lakshmi, is that with EB-5 adjudication specifically, there's been a lot of discussion around processing centers being closed during the COVID crisis. And one thing that I do think has been overlooked, adjudicators are still reviewing 526 and 829 petitions with EB-5. And so there's not a lot of room that they have to push out those reports or the final statistics, because so many other aspects of the processing units are closed down. Those folks are still reviewing, and we would anticipate seeing a lot of those decisions being pushed out shortly after the reopening, which is expected for USCIS the first part of June.
Well, there are two questions I want to ask you related to, risk, for the investors. Number one, the investors, and you pointed this out, have to, per the USCIS regulations, per the immigration regulations, they have to keep their investment in the project until the conditions are removed, which can be about 6 years. So how do they know that their investment is protected? How do they know that, what are some things, what are some mechanisms, financial protections that you have to ensure their investment is protected?
Yeah, I think, Lakshmi, there are a couple of things to keep in mind as international investors head into U.S.-based projects generally. As you've mentioned, in my professional past, I've been very fortunate in that I've had the ability to work across the globe. And you see different economic environments in different countries. You see different treatments of foreign nationals as investors in different countries. And one of the first things I always like to point out to investors from overseas in U.S.-based projects is that they are afforded all of the same protections and rights as a U.S.-based investor. So from an investment perspective in the specific project, there is no separate investor class for foreign nationals. It's all of the same rights and privileges, and those are legal rights, fiduciary rights, reporting responsibilities, participation rights. All of those things are going to be identical to your U.S.-based investment partners. And so we encourage everyone to ensure that the projects that they're investing in provide those same levels of protection without any carve-outs to EB-5 investors. We think that's important. They're our partners. They need to be treated like partners. And so that's the first thing I think you can look for. The second thing is just monitoring the progress of projects. Again, as we all know, things happen. The current crisis, as I said, is a global pandemic. And I think the first thing to remember is that every single person in the world is impacted by this. Every single business is impacted by this. And it's important to keep that in mind. Just because it's your project doesn't mean it's going to be immune to a global economic crisis. And so what you need to be looking for, again, are teams that you trust to manage through crisis times like this effectively and prudently. And, you know, I always encourage people to keep in mind, you need to think about it as though you were investing in your own business. And
Right.
for immigration purposes, while you might want to have certain things prioritized over others, you know, as a developer, as a regional center, as a participant in this process, we have obligations and responsibilities to each and every one of our investors. And so in taking that seriously, we try to do things like report in timely fashion on our projects so that everyone understands the status of their investment. You can look to global market conditions to determine whether or not you feel like your project is performing in line with what it should be. We also ask folks to keep in mind, we have annual reporting requirements to USCIS, the disclosure of EB-5 statistics and non-EB-5 investment in project. And then, you know, the last thing that I always encourage folks to do, the I-829 phase. So, you know, once you've gotten in, filed your 526, you get through your conditional approval. The I-829 phase is a real opportunity to sort of look through and see everything going on within a project, because that's where we're required to step in and assist counsel with job creation metrics, total expenditures on the project, economic performance to date. And so, you know, pay attention to those periodic updates, whether they're provided, you know, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. But as you and your counsel begin working on the 829 filing, you know, take advantage of that as a real opportunity to dig into the project as well.
And, you know, I always tell my clients to make sure that whatever EB-5 project they're going to invest in, that the developer has some skin in the game. They're not using all EB-5 money. Is that how the Greensboro Hotel, do you all have you all invested any funds, or is it all
we
EB-5?
have. So we have about $10 million in the project. So significant stake in the project in and of itself. We also place that capital lower down in the capital stack than our EB-5 investors. You know, we're asking, again, I always come back to this, Lakshmi, and I'm sorry that you've heard it a million times, but you know, I'm in the business of asking people to trust me with substantial sums of money and the futures of their families. Those are big things, right? And so if we're asking you to place that level of trust in us, we feel like the right thing for us to do is put capital at risk alongside your capital. And we're content to put it in line behind your capital. So that is.
Explain that to people who may not understand what that means.
So essentially what it means, and I'll use the Durham as a great example, the capital that we have in the Durham, we do not see a single penny of our initial investment back until we're able to return every single dollar to our EB-5 investment. And so that means if the last of those 26 investors only gets $499,999 back, we've lost $1 out of 13 million of investment. It means that my partners and I will not receive a single penny of our money back. That's fair to us. We're asking them to be the first money in at times. We're asking them to take a substantial risk. We're asking them to put the futures of their families, both personally and professionally, in our hands. And so we gladly take on a role that has us standing in line behind them when it comes to return of capital, because A, it's the right thing to do. B, we try to be conservative in our projections for projects. And as a result, we're very comfortable being where we are in line, because we're confident that capital return is going to occur, and hopefully there'll be, you know, a nice little profit margin in it as well.
And so, you know, as there is a, you know, international investor exploring different types of EB-5 regional centers, where would they see that information as to, number one, how much the developer has invested, and number two, where the priority lies in terms of their money that's invested versus the developer's money that's invested?
So you're going to see all of this information in the offering documents around the project. And those will include, in the case of EB-5 investments, there are some program-specific requirements that we have to meet. There's what's called a matter of HO compliant business plan, which for those professionals listening in, it doesn't look very much like a business plan that you and I would probably build for a new business that we were launching without EB5.
Right.
It's required to tick a number of boxes to satisfy USCIS, but the offering documents are going to contain that business plan. They'll contain the financial projections for the project, the proposed capital structure that'll include, what the debt in the project looks like, what the equity looks like, where it's coming from, how much from EB5, how much from the development team. And then it's going to be within the operating agreement where you're going to see which protections are afforded to what class of investor. And in most operating agreements, there'll typically be a section regarding distributions. We refer to that colloquially as the waterfall within the project. And essentially what that tells you is that as cash becomes available for distribution, whether it's on an annual basis from operations or from a capital event, whether that's a refinance or an outright sale, it'll dictate the terms for return of capital. And so it should lay out explicitly how the capital return or distribution will occur, which investors have priority and claim on whatever cash is available, and then ultimately how that gets doled out and the timeliness with which it does. And so if you're running across projects that don't provide that information clearly or not willing to point you to the specific section of the operating agreement, that would be a huge red flag for me.
Mm-hmm. And then we've got a few more minutes, so I wanted to also touch on, so we talked about, the risk with the money invested and the fact that it has to remain there until the conditions are removed. The second thing, especially in the downturn economy and, the hospitality industry being hit as a whole, how are they assured that the job creation is going to be met? Can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Sure, and if you don't mind, Lakshmi, I'll conflate a few things into the response here because I think your point about hospitality, particularly in the current environment that we're in, is a pertinent one. So obviously on a global basis, hotels and food and beverage related businesses have been hit disproportionately hard by this. In the example of the Greensboro project, though, we're somewhat protected from that by virtue of a construction cycle that'll last anywhere from 21 to 24 months, right? So in theory, the Westin Greensboro will be opening in what I think in the business community we've all grown accustomed to referring to as the post-vaccine environment. Mm-hmm. We're all fairly confident that we'll see a COVID vaccine in the near term. It will certainly occur during the construction cycle of the Westin. And so what I think you'll see is an opening of this project at a point in time where the market's really beginning to recover and coming back. And what we saw through the last recession was that those new quality establishments that provided a little bit of break from the norm tended to perform a little better because as folks got back out, began spending money, began traveling and visiting new locations, they were looking for those newer, higher end experiences. Mm-hmm. Point out that I think guest assumptions and demands for things like room sanitation and cleanliness are certainly going to be much higher. And I would venture to guess that the typical consumer who was worried about those things might be more prone to stay in a newer establishment than a project with a little bit of age on it. So we feel very well positioned with the Westin project. In terms of managing through this, again, for us, we're able to rely on that construction timeline. We know sort of where we fall in the cycle, and again, as I said, feel very confident coming out on the back end. Lakshmi, I'm going to ask you to refresh my memory quickly. The other half of that question was
basically the job creation.
Sorry.
Of job creation.
So as a lot of folks begin looking at EB5, they think about job creation and they think about what we refer to as direct job creation. So for anyone looking at either of the two pictures that are on the screen right now and thinking job creation, they're probably looking to the future, imagining a hotel tower and the people walking around inside of that, checking guests in or serving food and drinks in the restaurant. And they'd be right in doing that. Those are certainly jobs that count toward job creation. But USCIS provides flexibility in the determination of job creation around a project. So everything that you see occurring on the sites in these photographs, that activity, the movement of dirt, the people on site, all contribute to the job creation for a project like ours. Heavily on a category of jobs that are referred to as indirect jobs as a result of construction spending. That's a very long-winded way of saying when you spend $60 million on a construction project like this, invariably that is going to create jobs in the broader community. And so what economists who are much smarter than me have done, they've created algorithms that provide what are called jobs multipliers. And they're able to look at every dollar that gets spent within certain industrial categories on a construction project like ours. They say, okay, for every $1 million spent on something like architecture and engineering, or steel construction as walls and interior walls go up, for every $1 million you spend on that, you're going to create X number of jobs. And so from an investor perspective, when it comes to job creation, you want to be looking for a few things. One, you want to make sure that the job provides not only the number of jobs required based on the number of investors they're recruiting, so 10 jobs per recruited investor. You also want to make sure that they have a jobs buffer, because things can go on inside construction projects. You plan to build a 250-room hotel and you only end up building a 150-room hotel, right? It may have been a solid economic decision, but that's going to result in a reduction in expenditure, likely a reduction in job creation. And so you want to make sure that you have a sufficient jobs buffer in that initial jobs report to support economic and market-related changes. And then the last thing you really want to look for is a broad range of jobs and how they are created and accounted for. I think the point you're driving at, Lakshmi, is that for us in the Greensboro project, we will meet every bit of investor demand for job creation just through the construction process. So if we were to hit another issue like COVID, where many folks in the food and beverage and hotel industry have had to temporarily shut down or furlough a significant number of employees, if I were an EB5 investor, I'd be very worried about what that meant for the job creation within my investment. Well, what we have the ability to assure our investors is that we're going to hit our job creation metrics via the indirect jobs as a result of construction spending, so that by the time we get the doors open, we're still going to maintain a significant number of direct jobs. And in fact, those will also be sufficient to satisfy our EB5 investor needs. But if we hit an economic downturn that required a prudent business decision to reduce staffing in order to manage through a new business, the way that we've structured the job creation within our projects allows us the flexibility to be able to make those types of management decisions that will go a long way toward protecting the investor's principal investment.
Right, because it, the whole idea is not only to have a successful I-526, but to make sure that your petition for removing conditions is also successful. So for those that are exploring various EB5 projects, is that something a regional center usually discloses, is their analysis of job creation? And because for those who may not know this, if it is a non-regional center EB5 investment, those projects cannot leverage indirect job creation. It is only direct job creation. So it is only regional centers that can leverage indirect job creation, because don't you submit a report from an economist that outlines what the job creation will be? And do you in any way, do most regional centers disclose that to their prospective investors?
They should. I certainly can't speak for what all regional centers do, but as an investor, if you're not able to access that preliminary jobs report and get comfortable with the numbers that are in it, again, that should be a huge red flag. For us, it's one of the things that's included in the initial package of information that we provide to investors. We try to operate as transparently as we can. We do have a preliminary meeting where we just try to ensure that our projects in our regional center are a good fit for an investor looking toward EB5. And once we're able to get comfortable with them and they're able to get comfortable with us, the information disclosure begins for us on day one. Mm-hmm. And that early packet of information is going to be the EB5 compliant jobs report, the EB5 compliant business plan. We're also going to go ahead and share as much as we can on the project itself. So If you're not getting access to that level of information very early in the process, it should certainly be a red flag.
Right. And you also want to make sure that there is, so just to summarize what you said, they should look at the EB-5 documents that show job creation. They should ask for that if they're not given that. They should make sure that the equations and the, whatever algorithm, whatever makes sense. Have somebody independently who has that background to review it, to look at it, and to ensure that there's a buffer, so if there's some business change, that it can be addressed.
Exactly. And one of the things that I always feel compelled to remind people, use common sense. We're all intelligent folks. The vast majority of the people that we deal with are very savvy in business, both abroad and in their home country. Use that expertise and information that you possess as well. Don't necessarily rely on it exclusively, but to your point, Lakshmi, if you look at a jobs report and it says, okay, if you spend $1 million on steel and rebar, you're going to create 2,000 jobs, you probably know something's wrong with that, right? And so just read through these reports, make sure that you understand them, and the first gatekeeper should be, does it make sense? Does it feel viable? If the answer to that is no, that's a problem, and you need to be asking hard questions from that point forward. If the answer to it is yes, then certainly take advantage of the other resources. You've mentioned on a couple of occasions, use your CA or CPA. Mm-hmm. Tremendous resource for you in evaluating these things. Talk to friends that you have that may be in the industry that the EB-5 project is in, and have them vet the numbers and make sure that it makes sense. You need to be working with regional centers and projects that aren't afraid to be an open book. We should be inviting investors to ask questions, to criticize, to challenge us on things. A, because it keeps us honest and it ensures that we're getting the information to investors that they need. And B, again, it's the only way that we're ever going to collectively get to that level of trust and comfort that we as a group feel like is mandatory for moving forward with an EB-5.
One of the questions someone asked is, when people are trying to, because there's tax implications for, investments and so forth, should they consult with a CPA in their home country, or should they consult with someone in the U.S.? I would say they should consult with both.
I was going to say the answer to that is yes. Mm-hmm. Consult with both. Particularly during this petition period, right, where you filed your I-526, you've invested in a project. There may be some form of periodic return, but at a minimum, you're now going to be the holder of an investment in a U.S.-based entity. So you'll need to apply for an ITIN. There are a number of steps that need to be followed.
Right.
So you'll want to make sure that you're getting solid tax advice in the U.S. so that you're managing your investment here appropriately. But then you also want to make sure that you're getting great tax advice in your home country as well, because there are global tax treaties, within which both the U.S. and India participate. And so you certainly want to make sure that you're not running afoul of anything, but you also want to make sure that you're able to take advantage of any of the benefits of those global tax treaties as well, to avoid double taxation and things that I think a lot of investors unnecessarily worry about. And so we don't provide that level of tax guidance and advice. And frankly, I would caution against regional centers that do, because we sort of need to stick to what we're specialists in and know.
Right.
But we do have a number of resources that we can refer you to, as I know you do as well, Lakshmi. But I'm going to guess that most of the folks listening in know exactly who they would call anyway, and I would encourage them to take advantage of that expertise.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This has been really helpful to understand for a lot of people, not only how your regional center works, but it's also been enlightening for those listening when they're making an assessment. What are the things they should be looking for in any regional center? So I want to thank you again for taking your time out. I know you're really busy, but I truly appreciate it. And there was somebody that raised a hand, but they may not, I don't see it up, but if there are any questions that you all have On the immigration side, like I said, we'll have a corresponding video. You can either email us, and then there's Daniel's contact information up on the screen, so you can contact him as well. I thank you again, Daniel. Thank you all for joining.
Lakshmi, thank you, and thanks to those that took the time. I appreciate all that you do, Lakshmi, and thanks for putting on this series. I hope that everyone's getting as much out of it as possible, because it's truly informative, and I'm glad to have been a part of it.
Yeah, maybe next time we'll get you to talk about your expertise and understand what you were an art dealer before and bartender.
I'm a new cricket fan as well, and so I'm sure I could learn more from the audience than they could from me. So go Sunrisers.
Very good. All right, thank you again.
Thanks, Lakshmi.
Bye, everybody.